How do you feel when I say the word wait? What about waiting on the Lord? Today, we're going to talk about Noah and Mrs. Noah and their family and how they had to wait on the Lord, not only through the rain, which we covered last week, but waiting to get off the ark, which they waited for months and months and months. So, we're going to talk about that and how it applies to us today, because sometimes we're in a waiting pattern. So stay tuned.
Welcome to Bible Women in Bathrobes, the podcast where faith meets comfort. Join us Tuesday and Thursday mornings as the gals from Women Warriors of Light and their guests don bathrobes and dive into the inspiring stories of women in the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ. From Esther's bravery to the Sermon on the Mount, we explore it all with warmth, laughter, sisterhood, and maybe even a few sleepy-eyed moments. Tune in live or at your leisure as we learn lessons from Scripture which empower women today.
Welcome to another episode of Bible Women in Bathrobes. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson, and joining me today is my co-founder of Women Warriors of Light, Wendi Christensen. Welcome, Wendi.
Hello, ladies. So glad to be here today.
Yay. And also Tiffany Fletcher. And Tiffany is one of the wonderful women on our advisory board. Thank you for being here today, Tiffany.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yep. And Tiffany had some computer challenges getting on today. And sometimes I think Satan doesn't want us to move God's work forward, and he puts obstacles in our path. So we're happy to be here today. All right, guys. So we have covered chapters 6 and 7 of Genesis, of the story of Noah and Mrs. Noah and their family. And today we are going to talk about chapter 8. And as I reread this chapter this morning, I was just amazed at some of the prevalent themes that just jumped out at me. And waiting and gratitude. So let's start with verse 1. And I love the first phrase in verse 1 of chapter 8. And God remembered Noah, and I'm going to say, and his family, and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him on the ark. And God made a wind pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged, which means subsided. They stopped. And then, well, actually, let's just pause right there. God remembered Noah. Now, that brings up the question, well, did God forget Noah and his family? And the answer is obviously no. God's all-knowing and all-living. He knows everything. But I think this is an interesting interpretation of this. Sometimes we as mortals feel forgotten of God. Sometimes there's a period of silence in our life when we're going through good things or hard things. And we're like, hello, you feel like you're banging on the powers of heaven saying, remember me, God? You know what I mean? And I just thought we'd open the discussion with that, because sometimes we feel a little forgotten by God. Any thoughts there? Tiffany?
I love that. And I think another way of saying it, and God remembered God, God remembered Noah. I think sometimes God sees the good, like he gives us that period of waiting to see what we're going to do with it, right? He like gives us that period of going on the sea, being in the ark, not hearing from him, to see how we're going to react to it. Are we going to be angry? Are we going to be frustrated with God? Are we going to blame God for like the flood and everything else? Or are we going to just be still and wait for the Lord? And I think that in that God remembered Noah, I think another way of saying that is God saw that Noah was making good choices and that he was okay with the flood. And so he's like, okay, he made it through this test. Let's let the waters recede. And I think sometimes we need to our circumstances don't define us. We can't let our circumstances define us. But if we just do the best that we can in our circumstances, God will see that and he'll remember us and he will bless us and he will make those waters recede in his time, right? Always in his timing. But that's kind of how I see that. I feel like he never forgets us, but sometimes he lets us cry a little bit, and so we can move forward and learn good lessons.
Yeah. Wendy, anything you'd like to add?
No, I love what Tiffany's saying, and I feel like and God remembered Noah and every living thing, and then it says cattle, which I think represents all the animals, which reminds us that God is aware of all of his creatures, everything, every living thing he is aware of. And sometimes we are in the mundane, right? We're just kind of stuck in the day to day. And I'm sure it was very mundane on the ark. Okay, let's clean up the elephant poop today. Let's do, take care of the snakes, like make sure everything's fed. Like they were probably just busy with taking care of themselves and their food preparation and these animals all in this ark. And they probably felt many times like, okay, this is day after day, same thing, same thing. When is it going to change? When is the Lord going to help things? But I think it talks about how righteous they were. So they must have relied upon Heavenly Father, God a lot in their lives. And that waiting, like you're saying, like we're going to talk more about, but how it's almost like the promise and God remembered them. Like he knew their obedience and he had promised them things and they knew that and they felt, I think, remembered.
Yeah.
Because he was going to fulfill those promises, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Those are amazing comments. I love in the next few verses things that I didn't notice the last couple times that I've read it in preparation for this, that there was stuff going on while they were waiting. Do you know what I mean? In verse 1, we said, and God made a wind to pass over the earth. Was he blowing them where he needed to go? Probably. There had to be a high enough mountain for the ark to land on. But they might not have realized. Sometimes we feel God is blowing us in a certain way, and we're like, what is going on, Lord? And we don't realize that wind is taking us somewhere. And so I had that thought. But then in verse 2, it talks about the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And so there's all these, it's like, okay, for you guys to get off the ark, there's all these dominoes that God sees, that this needs to happen, and this needs to happen, and this, and this, and this. And so while you're sitting in this enclosed space and aren't seeing perhaps all the changes that are happening, God is the one orchestrating those changes. Do you know what I mean? I can see those parallels in our lives. Sometimes we're like, it's like we can't see how God is working in our lives when we're in a holding pattern, but he's doing things. We just may not understand or notice what has to happen for us to take that next right step. Does that make sense? And then even in verse 3, and the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. And then it says, and the ark rested in the 7th month. So it finally rested on a mountain. So God put them where they needed to be. But even then, from the 7th month to the 10th month, we're talking 3.5, probably 4 months here, that finally Noah opened the window. And I'm sure it was under God's direction, but sitting there with, you are just in your enclosed little spot. Wait. This is months and months and months. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just going to throw it out there and ask, what characteristics do you think we develop in the waiting period that Noah and Mrs. Noah and their sons and daughter-in-laws, this was a time of testing and refining. I guess refining is probably a good word. What characteristics do you think we learn by waiting, Wendy, or any other comment you have?
No, I actually, as I'm thinking about, it must have just rained and rained and rained. And I bet they got so tired of the rain, after months of raining and that waiting, like you're talking about. There was a time in my life I dealt with infertility for 7 years. 7 years was a long time for me, to sit and to wait and get excited for things to change. And then they didn't change. And hoping, and then it didn't happen. And, just sitting in that space of waiting What it did for me is it developed my character. Like I really had to look within myself. I had to look at my beliefs. I had to look at who I was, how I was coping, how I was dealing. I came to know myself really, really well in that waiting period, that waiting time. What was my strength? What were my strengths? What were my weaknesses? Um, what was I willing to turn over to the Lord in that waiting period? What was I not that I had to learn to turn over to him? Because, there were moments where I would get really frustrated and sad and down and, depressed and what's wrong with me? And you get those pity moments, right? But through it all, I feel like as I leaned upon God, which I had to remind myself to keep leaning upon him, I found strength. And I feel like when that beautiful miracle finally came and I was able to get pregnant and have my daughter, that joy and looking back on those 7 years as such a moment of growth for me. I had grown so much internally from those 7 years of waiting and had really come to know who I was as an individual. And that's been invaluable for me. And it served a beautiful purpose and really leaning upon that strength throughout, moving forward. It's really helped me to grow closer to the Lord and to understand that I can do it, first of all, that I can wait that long and that I have the fortitude and that any challenges that come my way, I'm like, I've been through something already. Like I already been through some tough times and it's just strengthened my faith even more in everything that I deal with now.
Yeah. Oh, Tiffany.
Yeah, I love that, Wendy. I think that we do. I mean, there's a reason why God says, "Be still and know," right? And know God, because in that waiting period, we get the opportunity, like our life, like you think about them in the ark, like they started building, 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 working hard. He had like the rain was coming, and he needed to build that ark, and he needed to get the animals in, and he needed to do all of the things, right? All of the things, and that was a lot of work. And then for him, for like almost an entire year, I think it was a year and a day, like he literally just waits. I mean, does the things that he can. He takes care of the animals and everything, but really his life is in the Lord's hands. And in that time, after we've done so much work and all that we can do, just waiting on the Lord is really, it allows us to be still and know him, right? And know ourselves and know him, and to really be able to have that relationship of trust. I mean, because that is really what they had to develop, right? I mean, obviously patience, but they had to really trust God, because I don't know about you, but I am a very, like, I like to get things done. And so I kind of force things sometimes. I'm like, God, if you're not going to do this, I will. Like, just kind of like, I'm just going to get this done and I'm going to do it and I'm going to do it my way. If you're not going to do it yours, right? And that's not, obviously not the right way of doing things. But I think sometimes we get in that place where we're like, I just am going to do this if you're not going to do it. And we want to force things, when in reality, like it takes a lot of patience to wait for God to tell you to open the window. Like, especially when you've got an ark full of animals that probably stink really bad, right? Like you think about that poor woman on the ark that was like shoveling poop every day. She's like, come on, can we just open a window? No, not until the Lord tells us to. And even like when you get further down and they get to the point where like the bird doesn't come back, so they obviously are good, they still wait another month and a half before God tells them to get off the ark. So I just think that sometimes it allows us to learn to trust him and realize, okay, this is him trusting me to listen. So I need to trust him in what I do. So I think trust is the biggest takeaway in that scenario that they have to learn. God trusts them, and God trusts us, and we need to trust him, basically.
Yeah. Well, I heard a lot of themes coming out, and I'd written a few things down as far as characteristics we learn while we're waiting, and patience is a big one. Oh, hard to develop, and you can only develop it going through something that makes you wait, right? Trust in God. Oh, It is hard to develop. And with that trust, there's also that submission to his will, which they really had to do here. They were totally in God's hand. I mean, he could move that ark where he wanted, putting them down where they were supposed to be. So they didn't end up in the middle of the ocean. Do you know what I mean? Trusting that wind is going to lead me where it needs to do. Acceptance, that this is where I am. This is who I am. These are the things I'm learning about myself, kind of like Wendi was saying earlier. And I love what you said, Tiffany, also about being still. That there are times when we can be still and allow God to kind of come in and remind us that, hey, you're not forgotten. I still see you and all those animals on the ark. I see that you're working hard to keep everybody alive and moving, Mrs. Noah, organizing, keeping all the animals happy and taken care of. I was also thinking about some of the other verses in the Bible that talk about patience. Of course, there's that be still one, and that's like one of my favorites. One of the other verses that popped into my head is that one in Isaiah 40:31, where it says, "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." And I love that one because, and as it pertains to Mrs. Noah and her family, boy, she had to rely on God for strength, because mentally and physically and emotionally being in that same waiting period for so long and feeling like nothing is changing is very draining. It's so exhausting mind, body, and soul, and so she had to rely on God. And as I pause and ponder this, as God is getting ready for them to leave the ark, what lessons does he want them to learn? What lessons does he want them to have learned that they can then pass on and build a righteous posterity because they learned those lessons, that I can trust in God. I mean, wouldn't you love to have just poked your head into this time period of the Bible and just say, Noah and Mrs. Noah, what did you guys learn? And what did your sons and daughter-in-law like have them just share their little witness of God after being on the ark? Like, what did you learn? Seriously. And I'm sure it would have been patience and strength. I can trust in God. He'll take care of me. He'll protect me. He'll guide me. He strengthens me when I'm feeling weak. I mean, I can totally see them saying these types of things. And it's because each of us has passed through things that have made us wait. And those are the same lessons we learned here thousands of years later, waiting, right? It's interesting. It's like they say history repeats itself, and it does, in so many ways, except we haven't had a flood because he promised he wouldn't do that again. But those same lessons we can learn. And so here, Tiffany kind of alluded to the fact that they finally opened the window. They sent out a raven and a dove. They returned, wait some more, send them out again, return with a little olive branch, olive leaf, sorry, in verse 11. Wait again, and finally it says in the 601st year. So you're right, it was over a year. In the first month and the first day of the month, the waters were dried up, and Noah removed the covering of the ark. There was a covering on it, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And even then, they waited. Listen to this, verse 14. And in the second month, so an entire month later, after they've taken this covering off, it says, God spake unto Noah in verse 16, go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. We're waiting, but they finally said, you can go. Do you know what I mean? And how many times have we felt that when we're like, I'm chomping at the bit, God, please, please help me. I know, Wendi, you made a comment about counseling women who are waiting. Thoughts there?
Oh, yeah. I was telling Tamara earlier, I know women who are like in situations that are really, they feel really bleak. They're in relationships that feel really bleak and they just have this desire. They don't want to stay, but the Lord has told them to wait. And as I've listened and heard, their pleadings and this waiting of when will things change? When will it change? When will it change? It just reminded me so much of the situation with Noah and his family. I'm sure, they thought, when is the ground going to dry? When can we leave? We are so tired of being in this boat, in this ark, right? When can we leave? And it's interesting that sometimes I think we also, in the waiting period, when we feel forgotten, I don't think that it's any coincidence that the Lord, they start out the chapter with God remembered them, because they had to like keep that in the forefront of their mind that whole year. And especially when they're just sitting in this boat and on a mountain, waiting for the ground and the water to subside, waiting for the ground to appear, they had to think, when are we going to see any light at the end of the tunnel? And yet God gives them little things. And sometimes it's the little things that we get that we have to hold on to, hope, in knowing that God is remembering me. He does remember me. Like, I'm sure they held on so much hope to that, those, the raven and then the dove. And then when the dove came back, it's like, then when the dove came back with the olive branch, I'm sure it was so much hope for them to hold on another, month and a half, right? Like sometimes it feels like we just get these little teeny tiny pieces in the waiting that give us hope. But yet there are ways that we know and see that the Lord is remembering us even in our waiting period, even in our darkest hours, right? When you do feel like the floor of the heaven is concrete. It's not. The Lord does remember us. Just like, working with these women, they hold on to every little thing that gives them that glimmer of hope that the Lord is aware of me in my trial. He knows what I'm going through. Even if my circumstances right now aren't changing, I'm holding on to the faith that He remembers me. He knows I'm here and I'm growing in this process,
Ooh.
in this waiting period.
I love what you said there about looking for those little signs, I guess, from heaven that things are happening. And we see that, we see tiny bits of progress, not as fast as they probably wanted, right?
No, I'm sure they wanted to, like, I would want to get out on land, like, woohoo, let's go. And it would have taken everything to just stay in the boat and just be patient until the Lord said, it's okay to come out now.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Tiffany?
I love that. I think that that's something that we even do today, like that we need to do today, right? Like I love that when they come out of the ark, the first thing they do is show gratitude to Heavenly Father, because that shows that they had to have been in the spirit of gratitude to begin with, right? Like to think about that even. So I know that for me, when I was a kid and my mom's violent altar came out and was very abusive, like it was really, really hard. It was a very hard time. And as a kid, I didn't know that it would ever end. I just thought that's what life was like, I just didn't know that there was anything different than that. And so I watched Pollyanna, and she played the glad game. And that shows how old I am. But I watched it. She played the glad game. And so like I started playing the glad game in my life. Like when my mom would her violent altar would start being abusive, I would, run into my room, I would close the door, and I would kind of use my body and kind of wedge myself between the chair and the bed so she couldn't open it up. And I would play the glad game. I would be like, Holy Father, I'm so glad that I made it here safely and didn't hurt me. I'm so glad that my siblings are out of the house. I'm so glad that I know that Jesus loves me. Like I literally played the glad game, and it brought me out of those hard things, right? And I imagine, I mean, obviously there wasn't violence going on in the ark, but there were hard things, and I also feel like they probably sang a lot. Singing like is something for me I remember, singing zippity doo dah, zippity a, like, or the song from Annie, tomorrow, tomorrow, you're only a day, like those things were like helpful for me as I sang them because it would remind me that today was hard, but maybe tomorrow would be better. And that my situation did not have to be, it's not what it was going to always be, that maybe tomorrow would be a good day for my mom and it would be better for me. And that this was still a good day and I could still make it a good day. And I think that sometimes those glimmer of hope are things that we have to create ourselves. Like sometimes God sends them and he gives them to us and he's like, here you go. The rain has stopped. You are now on a mountain. So, you're not moving. So that means that you're stuck on a mountain, which means the water's going down even more. Here's an olive branch, open the window, like he gives us these things. But in the waiting period between those sparks and glimmers of hope, we have to create our own hope within us. And I think that starts, for at least for me, with the glad game, which is just instant gratitude, right? Just glad for the things that you have. And also music and singing, praising God, prayer, thanking him. All of those things create that feeling within us that helps us in the waiting period to get through the hard things. And I know, because I lived in darkness for a very long time, with a mom who had multiple personalities, and I know what it means to build light, and I know what it means to make those um, moments of hope in your own life, create them for yourself, because sometimes God does want to see what we're going to do with the circumstances, and he is silent. And so we need to be the one praising, and we need to be the one glowing and growing and the things that we can do. And those glimmers of hope we have to create in ourselves. So sorry, that was long, but so important to me.
I love it. Tamara, can I add one thing with that, with you, what you're saying? It's interesting, Tiffany, as you were talking, and I thought, and look at all that you went through, like such a hard, difficult, dark time in your life. But now what you do is you bring light to so many people and you bring light to so many women, and that the Lord created that, like he grew that in that waiting time for you, right? That period of time in your life, those challenges brought you to a place where you now bring so much light to so many people. And it made me think of, here Noah and his family, they were in the most cruel, like it was so horrible and awful in the earth that the Lord had to destroy it, right? He had to like cleanse it. And they had come from these horrible circumstances. They must have seen just horrible sin and atrocities and everything, right? They're coming from this experience. Isn't it interesting that this whole time frame, this year and this waiting upon the Lord, maybe it was for the Lord to help them to find that strength within them, to build, to create that character, because they then land and they're going to start building this whole new community, this brand new beginning. And the Lord needs them to be in a different space, in a different frame of mind, right? He needs them to be, they come with this gratitude. They are in a different space. They come out with gratitude. Maybe some of this waiting time that they had to go through with the storms and the sitting on the mountain and then just sitting in the ark doing nothing, like maybe that was all to refine their character and truly waiting on the Lord because of the evil that they had just left. They've got this kind of waiting period, and now they're meant to go and create this beautiful space that's a brand new beginning, brand new start, and brand new generations of people, right? And they're going to have this solid start because of this waiting period that they've been through of refinement.
Love that. That's so beautiful. And so, yeah, eye-opening. Thank you. That was exactly what the Spirit needed to tell us today. It's beautiful. And I agree. I think sometimes we look at our hard things and we're like, why God? Why me? Why now? Why are you doing this? But in reality, what we need to do is we need to be still and say, okay, what do you want me to learn? What do I need to gain from this that will help me do your work better? Because really what we're here to do is God's work, right? This entire life is a waiting period. Like we knew the beginning, we were with him. We know in the end, hopefully we're going to be with him again. But in the meantime, we're waiting, and God is looking to see what we're going to do with this life and how we're going to be an instrument in his hands and be a light on the hill for his children. And sometimes I love that he does give us those waiting periods to grow our character so that we can be the disciple he needs us to be. So it helps to see our trials differently, and help see that waiting period as a growth experience instead of a trial, so to speak.
Love it. Love it. Wow. Well, let's wrap it up. Takeaways, and let's start with Tiffany. Why don't you share your takeaway from today's episode?
Just that as we live in a attitude of gratitude, and rejoice in the Lord even in our trials, and create those moments of light, those sparks of light and hope in our life, the waiting will be easier, and God will strengthen us to be able to do that. And he will show us signs that he's there. And we just have to look for him, because what you look for, you will find. So start looking for the signs, start looking for those things that God has given you in your life to help you know he's there. And then if you can't find them, then create them for yourself, because then you will see them, because your heart will be in a different place.
Love it. Wendi.
Yeah, I love that too, Tiffany. I think just the biggest thing is that in the waiting periods of our lives, God knows where we're at. Like Noah didn't know where he was at. His family didn't know where they were at, but God knew. He knew where they were. He knew what was coming. He knew the plan that he had, the timing that he had. And sometimes it's really hard to trust that, but God knows. He does remember us in all of our waiting times. And we may not understand everything that's going on around us, but trusting him that he knows. He knows the circumstances of our lives. He knows the purpose of the waiting in our lives and the blessings that will come from the waiting periods of our lives. And that we can choose that gratitude just to show, as I think, as we see and experience and rejoice in that gratitude, how much it will fill our own lives.
I think my biggest takeaway here is that after the darkest nights, the sun does indeed rise. And we see that pattern in the earth, that day always follows night. And so when we're in that waiting period, when it's midnight and it feels the darkest, and 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and 5 a.m, and you're like, when is the light coming, Lord? Just clinging onto that hope that morning will come, and waiting does end. And that you're not alone when you're in the waiting periods of your life, that God is with you, and there's angels all around you, both seen and unseen, that can help you through those times, and just everything else you guys have said. So thank you for joining us today. If you're in a waiting period, hang in there, my dear friends, and lean on God until the morning does indeed come.
Thanks for tuning in to Bible, Women, and Bathrobes, hosted by Women Warriors of Light. We've loved exploring the stories of remarkable women or the teachings of the Savior today with you. If today's episode brought someone special to mind, be sure to spread the word. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment of inspiration and sisterhood. Just a friendly reminder, all opinions we share are entirely personal, as we are trying to decipher and apply Bible teachings just like you are. Until next time, stay faithful, and may your journey be blessed and illuminated by God's love.